The 21st February emergency meeting on Ukraine was the third discussion called on the crisis in a span of 20 days at the United Nations Security Council. But looks like there's little to no headway that has been made by the Security Council to avert a further crisis. So, are you wondering why the UNSC, whose primary mandate is to maintain peace and stability in the world, unable to stop a crisis of this nature? Here's why. After the devastation of World War II, 51 countries came together with a commitment to maintain international peace and security, develop friendly relations among nations, and promote social progress, better living standards, and human rights. And so, the international organization, the United Nations, was founded in 1945. Under UN, the Security Council primarily has the responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. It has 15 members and each member has one vote. Among the 15 members, there are 10 non-permanent members, among them India at the moment as well. And there are 5 permanent members, which are the US, UK, France, China and Russia. The P5 members have a power to veto, and that's where the real hurdle lies in the Ukraine crisis. So what is veto? It was agreed by the drafters of the UN Charter that if any one of the 5 permanent members casts a negative vote in the 15-member Security Council, the resolution or decision would not be approved. So, there simply can't be any resolution passed in the UNSC, the text of which is not palatable either to Russia or the US because both have veto powers. Let's now look at a previous example of Russia's annexation of Crimea to give you a better idea of how the UNSC has been going about this critical issue regarding Ukraine. In March 2014, the vote on a US draft resolution was to oppose a referendum on the status of Crimea and urge countries not to recognize it. It received 13 votes in favor, China abstained, and Russia cast a veto. Western countries then, in a bid to try and corner Russia, took a similar text to a 193-member General Assembly, which adopted a resolution declaring the referendum as invalid. It received 100 votes in favor, 11 against, and 58 abstentions, while 24 countries didn't vote. The General Assembly voting is not legally binding and was used only for messaging against Russia. At present, in the month of February, Russia holds the United Nations Security Council's rotating presidency. That is why, even after the 31st January discussion, Russia got another discussion going last week under its presidency. A UNSC presidency is largely an administrative role. But remember, it involves issues like scheduling meetings that is seen as critical when such a crisis breaks out. Amidst all this, if you are wondering, what role does India have to play? There is some significance there as well for India in the UNSC at the moment. That's because, as I pointed out, India is currently a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. And what has happened and what has been India's stand and role so far, considering India is friends with both the US and Russia? In the 31st January discussion, India abstained and put out a statement suggesting that they are in touch with all parties involved and that they want and urge all the parties to maintain peace and stability. India also expressed concern for its own about 20,000 Indian citizens in Ukraine. Now, even though India abstained from voting, what we saw was the Russian side portraying it as a clear support for them. It put out a message on social media suggesting that along with China, which had voted against any discussion on Ukraine, India and the others who abstained were also siding with Russia. If you spoke to Western diplomats, they too believe that abstention is always not considered a neutral vote. However, they understood India's viewpoint and where it's coming from, considering that it has great ties with both US and Russia. The latest discussion was held after Russia, in fact, recognized the separatist-held regions in the Donbass area of eastern Ukraine. Once again, India came out and said that time should be given for the implementation, the real implementation rather, of the Minsk agreements that came about in 2014 after Russia annexed Crimea, and that discussions should continue and diplomacy should be allowed to avert any war or crisis. But amidst all this, the West continues to believe that Russia might use this as a pretext, that is, its movement of troops inside the separatist-held regions, which it has now recognized, and therefore create, according to the West, a false flag to ultimately invade Ukraine. Under these circumstances, will the United Nations Security Council step up to avert a war? The World War II ended in 1945. It's been 70 years and Europe has largely been peaceful. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson believes that Putin is trying to plunge Europe into a war. And therefore, it becomes even more imperative that the United Nations Security Council steps up and averts any such crisis.